family cottages are wonderful. It's a chance for everybody to get together a few times a year, but boy, can it get complicated. So here to help us through this is Laura Southall. Thank you so much. Good to see you.
Good to see you too. Thank you for having me.
So sometimes family cottages go way back. They may be something that you went to as a child yourself, and then with your parents and your grandparents, and now you're the one with the cottage, and you've got kids and grandchildren. Some cottages, they just get handed down, but things have got a little more complicated now.
They have. It's so complicated and it's so emotional. There's more emotional attachment often to a cottage or a recreational property than there is to a home, because all your happy memories are there. But the problem in Canada is that we pay capital gains on the transfer of a cottage. So if you sell your cottage or you pass it on to a child, you have to pay capital gains on that transfer. So what does that mean exactly? Well, if you bought your cottage for $100,000 and then it's now worth $900,000, then the difference between your purchase price and your sale price, $800,000 in this case, is the gain. And what you would actually pay in tax when it comes to tax time would be about 25% of that gain. So that's a rough number. I'm not an accountant, but that's a rough guide to give you an estimate. So on your now $800,000 gain, you're going to owe $200,000 in capital gains, 25%, which is a lot. And it's a lot when the cottage was purchased for very little and it's gone up in value. And you think about some of the families buying cottages in Muskoka that, you know, they bought for $100,000 and now it's worth $2 million. The capital gains are huge. So people wrestle with this. What am I doing with my family cottage? Am I passing it down to my children? Do they want it? Can they afford it? Who's paying the taxes? And how do we structure this? So there's lots of options, but first of all, you have to think about the capital gains. And the longer you hold on to the cottage, the bigger the capital gain.
Right, because you think your cottage is going to gain in value rather than losing in value.
That's right.
So if someone out there is doing the calculation and saying, oh, I've got a family cottage, I know I paid that for it, and I've been told it's worth this. So you take the difference and you pay capital gains on half of it. Is that how that works?
So capital gains is 50%. That's what's actually attributed to you on your tax return. But what you actually owe in tax is generally half of the 50%, so 25%.
Because it throws you into another tax bracket?
So I'm estimating at the highest amount.
Okay, right, yeah. Plan for the worst and hope for the best,
So if you estimate, if you look at the difference between the purchase price and the sale price, and you take 25% of that, that's probably close to what you're going to owe. So there's things you can do to minimize it. You have to keep track of any expenses like adding a porch or adding a dock, that sort of thing. You can add that to the cost base, which is what you paid for the cottage. So if you put a $60,000 renovation on, then that gets added to what is considered the purchase price of the cottage.
Okay, so that would cut down on
the capital gains.
But it has to be something that increases the value of the cottage, not that you changed the light bulbs and you ran the vacuum cleaner.
That's right.
It's something, it is an ongoing maintenance things.
Yes,
and they can can they get really sticky about, well, no, that's really maintenance. Come on, you know, that door was falling apart. It needed to be replaced.
If you got audited, yes, they'd be fussy.
But, all right, but keep your receipts is number one.
For sure, keep your receipts.
And right now, go to your files and make sure you've got receipts going back as far as you can, because it's good. You may have had this cottage for many years.
Yeah. So another thing to consider is that people think that they can transfer their cottage to their child while they're alive with no tax implications. And that is not true. When you change the name, even if it's going to your child, you are triggering the capital gains on that cottage. So know that whether you sell it or whether you transfer the name to somebody in your family, you will pay the capital gains. So then the question is, when are you going to pay that? So some people's strategy is to transfer now. So my mom is 81, she has a little cottage. Does it make sense to transfer it into my name now and trigger the gain now, thinking that maybe my mom will live another 10, 15 years and the gain will just get bigger? So wouldn't it make sense to trigger it now? The downside to that is now I own the cottage. So what if I decide to sell it? My mom has lost control. Or what if I get divorced? Then that's part of the settlement and the divorce. So there is a loss of control that happens. But often people want to transfer it into their children's name to trigger the gain now because they know they want to leave it to their children. So then the next option would be to leave it in your will to your children. So when that happens, you are triggering the gain. Whenever that happens, you could leave it to your children or you could leave it in a trust. So that's a different way of leaving it, and sometimes you can do that and add a fund for maintenance. This costs money, but you set up a trust, the cottage is in the trust, and you also put money into the trust to pay for the maintenance, pay for the taxes, because sometimes the kids don't have the funds to pay for the maintenance on the cottage, right?
No, I'm just thinking, if you leave it to someone in your will, normally there's other money there. There might be an insurance policy, there might be savings, there might be your primary residence.
Yes.
So what you gain from the other assets that someone leaves behind might pay that capital gains on the
Certainly.
cottage.
Yeah, so that's taking from the estate and paying the capital gains on the cottage. So let's imagine that there's 3 kids, and one gets left the cottage, one gets left the house, and one gets the pot of money.
Oh, right.
But now the pot of money has to go to pay the capital gains on the cottage. So now this child got not only the cottage, but they got their capital gains paid for. And this child had their pot of money reduced.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes, and the other one with who got the primary residence
didn't have to pay any tax and thought this was great.
Too bad for you.
Yeah, it becomes an equalization, and sometimes one child is interested in the cottage and wants it. Other children aren't interested, or sometimes there's 4 children that are interested, and how are you going to make this work?
Well, yeah.
There's a lot of problems, and I would say the first step is communicating about them long before the parents pass away. So if you have an open conversation, starting with who's interested, right? Who's interested in having the cottage after we pass away? Because maybe nobody is. Yes. And then if there's 4 of you, how are you going to share this? And how is this going to work? And if 2 people are affluent enough to pay the bills, but 2 aren't, how is this going to work? How are we going to share things? It becomes very complicated. The trust is very clean, right? The cottage goes into the trust, it pays for everything, but it requires money to maintain it. You have to file every year, it costs money to file. So if there's an excess of money, then that's a great way to do it. There's also people that put life insurance in place.
That was what was crossing my mind. What about a life insurance policy to cover this?
Definitely, you could put a life insurance policy in place to pay the capital gains. The problem is often people start thinking about the life insurance policy when they're older, where the life insurance policy costs quite a bit of money. Mm-hmm. If you start when you're early or younger and you start thinking about it, you can put the life insurance policy into place and it doesn't cost as much. But it's often quite expensive to put a life insurance policy in place on an older person because the odds of them dying are very high. That doesn't mean that a child couldn't pay the premiums on the insurance policy, knowing that that money is going to get them pay the capital gains and they get the cottage. It's certainly a strategy that's used. You just want to evaluate the cost benefit. There's also selling the cottage, right? You have 4 children. How are they going to share this? Different levels of interest. What if you sold the cottage, took the profit, divided it 4 ways, and let the kids buy their own cottage, do their own thing?
That'd probably be the cleanest way.
Well, that is pretty clean.
It is, and then the one says, well, instead of buying another cottage, I'm going to buy this one.
Yeah.
And then it is
It's
theirs.
theirs.
It's theirs, yeah. Now I'm just thinking, if you left let's say you've got 4 kids, 2 are affluent, 2 aren't. Even if they're not, it comes down to making decisions. You know, well, you know, you're married. I was married for a long time. Trying to decide where to put money and where not to.
Right.
With a married couple is complicated enough. Never mind 4 kids.
Plus their spouses.
And their spouses, and maybe even their kids getting into the act and saying, well,
who wants to replace the dock? Who wants to,
Right. We don't need, I mean, the dock still works. You just have to walk around the edges, not down the middle of it. I mean, come on. You can just see where people have different standards.
Yeah.
And you know, why replace the stove? We never use the oven anyway. You know, like those kinds of, I could see those kinds of arguments.
In my husband's family, they have 6 children, and they tried for 1 year to share the family cottage. And after one summer, his brother ended up buying it, and now it's his brother's. And we bought our own cottage, and another brother bought his own cottage. Everybody did their own thing. It wasn't great because you arrived, people have different cleaning standards.
Oh, that's true too.
Yes,
of course.
Yes, so it wasn't clean. My standards are pretty high, so then I would spend 2 days cleaning. But then on the other end, at the end of the week, I would clean my way out, but the next person didn't clean. And so I felt like I spent all this time cleaning, no one else cleaned. And then you're trying to share between 6 people. Okay, we're here this week, we're here that week. It was awkward.
Right.
It was really awkward.
And I left 6 bottles of wine. Now there's only 3. I can just see that happening.
And then you have to split all the expenses too.
Oh, right. And did you really need to buy such an expensive? Right.
Exactly.
Oh,
Do we need to have snow shoveling in the winter when or snow removal in the winter when we're not there? Well, that's how the propane people get in to fill the tank. You know, you're having these conversations, and it's hard.
And you're the only one who comes up here in the winter in snowshoes, so why should the rest of us have to pay? Oh, I can just imagine what Christmas dinner would be like at their house.
It was chaotic.
Oh,
so it lasted for 1 year, and then we all realized that this was not right, and my husband's brother bought the cottage outright, and now it's his. And we all did our own thing, and it's fine, but it was an exercise in seeing how complicated it could be, right?
Yes.
So, and everybody loves the happy memories of the cottage, but the idea, what happens in the next generation? So if you leave it to the kids, what's going to happen with the grandkids, and how is this going to continue at some point?
So if you think it was complicated with 6 people,
that's right.
you know, let's try 12 or 18 people, you know, grandchildren, how complicated this can get.
Yes.
Oh,
but
boy.
really, people need to understand the capital gains first.
Right.
And then have the conversation with their kids about interest, I would say.
Right.
Yeah.
So,
because sometimes the capital gains, it's so huge that it's not even possible. It will have to be sold.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's just not possible for anybody to come up with that money.
Yeah.
Is it a good idea to get your cottage appraised so you know what you're dealing with?
Or at least, I don't know if I would pay for an appraisal, but I would at least have a real estate agent tell me a rough market value, because it's going to change. You know, you might have the conversation and still be 5 years out, and the market's going to change. But at least then you have an idea. Most people have a general idea of what their cottage is worth when they're looking at
you can.
the properties around them.
Yeah, when one goes up for sale, we all play nosy neighbor and go on the open house and look up the ad and all that. We all do it.
Yeah.
So you'd have a rough idea. You know how much you paid for it. And if you were smart, you kept all the receipts for all the improvements to the cottage over all the years that you owned it.
Yeah.
So, and it's unfortunate because all those happy memories.
I know.
And suddenly it becomes, you can't get out of there fast enough because it's nothing but stress for that over who gets the cottage. It's unfortunate.
It can, a lot can be alleviated by conversations ahead of time, for sure. And then everybody knows what's coming and what's expected. It's bad to read the will for the first time and find out that you're not getting the cottage, right?
And you're banned from because that's if someone else owns it, i.e. your brother, then it doesn't mean that you get to use it for 2 weeks in the summer. It's not your cottage.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, cottages are expensive. It's expensive to run.
Yes, they are.
Yeah.
Yes, I've had 2 of them. Yes, they are. Yes. Wow, so much to think about. This is super. And always good to see you.
Always good to see you too.
Absolutely. If people want to talk to you about anything financial, your contact information is on the screen.
And you can find me anywhere online too.
Yeah, you have online presence for sure, for sure. Have a wonderful Christmas.
Thank you, you too.